The grand ballroom shimmered under the golden chandeliers, the air filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the clinking of expensive crystal glasses. Laughter echoed as elegantly dressed guests sipped on premium champagne, engaged in discussions about business, politics, and high society affairs. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved smoothly between the guests, serving gourmet hors d'oeuvres and top-shelf liquor. Through the towering entrance doors, Monica Carter walked in. A stunning black woman in a breathtaking emerald green gown that flowed effortlessly around her. Her natural grace and confidence made her presence impossible to ignore. Yet, despite her elegance, a few heads turned, their eyes scanning her with subtle curiosity. Some with admiration, others with silent judgment. Across the room, Ethan, one of the senior waiters, noticed her immediately. He was in his late 30s, with neatly combed brown hair and a sharp uniform that fit him perfectly. But behind his professional exterior was a man filled with arrogance and deep-seated prejudice. His gaze lingered on Monica, and a frown crept onto his face. To him, she didn't look like she belonged among the wealthy elite. His immediate assumption? She was either a staff member, an assistant, or someone who had somehow wandered into the wrong event. Monica, unaware of the quiet judgments being passed, walked toward the bar, her posture poised and confident. She settled onto a bar stool, her polished nails tapping lightly on the counter as she waited to be served. Ethan, standing just a few feet away, deliberately ignored her. Instead, he turned to a middle-aged white couple who had arrived after Monica and immediately greeted them with a warm smile. "Good evening, sir, ma'am. What can I get for you?" he asked, his voice filled with charm. Monica watched as he poured their drinks, chatted briefly, and moved on to the next guest, once again skipping over her. She cleared her throat lightly, trying to be patient. "Excuse me," she said politely, her voice smooth yet commanding. Ethan slowly turned toward her, his expression blank, as if noticing her for the first time. "Yes?" He responded curtly. Monica offered him a pleasant smile. "I'd like a glass of Chardonnay, please." Ethan's lips twitched, almost as if suppressing a smirk. He leaned slightly closer, his eyes scanning her from head to toe, a hint of condescension in his voice as he asked, "Are you sure you belong here?" For a split second, silence filled the space between them. A few nearby guests subtly turned their heads, having overheard the question. Some exchanged awkward glances, while others pretended they hadn't heard anything at all. Monica held Ethan's gaze, unshaken. There was no anger on her face, no immediate reaction, just a quiet, powerful presence that radiated dignity. She took a deep breath, her expression calm but firm. "Why? Do I not look like I belong?" she asked, her voice steady. Ethan shrugged, feigning innocence. "It's just... I didn't think I'd see someone like you at an event like this." The tension in the air became almost tangible. The bartender, who had been preparing a drink nearby, suddenly busied himself, avoiding eye contact. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, waiting to see how Monica would respond. Would she cause a scene? Would she back down? Instead, Monica did something that caught everyone off guard. She smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that was neither forced nor amused. It was the kind of smile that came from someone who knew exactly who they were and refused to be diminished. She crossed one leg over the other and tilted her head slightly. "You must have me confused with someone else," she said, her voice effortlessly graceful. "I belong exactly where I choose to be." Ethan hesitated. He hadn't expected such a composed response. Before he could say anything else, Monica glanced at her gold wristwatch, as if she had far more important things to do than entertain his ignorance. "Now, about that Chardonnay. Or do you plan on ignoring me all night?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan clenched his jaw, but had no choice. With stiff movements, he begrudgingly poured her drink, setting it in front of her without another word. Monica took the glass with a graceful nod, bringing it to her lips as she finally turned away, dismissing Ethan without another thought. But the moment wasn't over, because little did Ethan know, his biggest humiliation was yet to come. Monica took a delicate sip of her Chardonnay, maintaining her composure despite the lingering unease in the air. As she turned to chat with her friend Lisa, she noticed the unspoken tension hanging between her and Ethan. Lisa had been watching the entire interaction unfold with a growing sense of frustration. Lisa leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, as she said, "You're letting him treat you like that? That guy's got issues." Monica smiled softly, her eyes scanning the room. She had faced far worse in her life than some arrogant waiter with outdated prejudices. Still, she knew that silence wouldn't solve anything. She looked at Ethan, who was now standing with his back to her, serving a table of guests who had just arrived. But then something caught her eye. Ethan, glancing over his shoulder, caught Monica's gaze. Without a word, he turned back to his task, his eyes narrowing as if she was an inconvenience he had to tolerate. And that's when it happened. He walked over to her, a sly smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Here you go," he said, setting a glass in front of her with a flourish. But it wasn't the Chardonnay she had ordered. Instead, it was a cheap wine, a far cry from the quality of the drink she had requested. A look of disdain passed across his face before he turned to serve another table without even bothering to acknowledge her again. Monica stared at the glass for a long moment, the cheap scent of the wine filling her nostrils. She could feel the eyes of the other guests upon her, watching, waiting to see what she would do next. Lisa, who had been waiting for a reaction, leaned closer to Monica and whispered, "That's just disrespectful. He's doing this on purpose." Monica didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for the glass, took a slow sip, and set it down gently on the counter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. She simply looked directly at Ethan as he busied himself with another customer. Her eyes locked on him as she spoke calmly, without a hint of fear or anger in her voice. "I believe I ordered something else," she said, her words cutting through the air like a calm, controlled storm. Ethan paused in his tracks, his eyes flicking to her. For a moment, his arrogant smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Oh," he said, turning to face her with a look of mock surprise, "I didn't think you'd even know what that is." Monica's calm gaze never wavered. She didn't flinch at his taunting tone. She simply raised an eyebrow and replied, "And yet I do." Ethan seemed to smirk to himself, as if enjoying the tension he was creating. But he didn't realize how badly he was misjudging Monica. Before she could say anything more, Ethan begrudgingly took the cheap drink from in front of her, ready to replace it. But just as he reached out to grab the glass, his hand slipped. The wine splashed out of the glass and poured over her stunning gown, staining the rich fabric with the dark red liquid. Monica gasped, feeling the shock of the spill as the wine soaked through the delicate fabric. For a second, she felt a rush of embarrassment, but only for a second. Her composure returned almost instantly. Ethan stood there, wide-eyed and fumbling with words. "Oh, my bad. Guess accidents happen, huh?" he said, his tone not apologetic at all. Instead, there was a hint of sarcasm, as if he were suggesting she was overreacting. Monica's jaw clenched for a split second, but she didn't let him see it. She slowly stood up, her fingers lightly brushing the spot on her dress where the wine had spilled. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, the tension hanging thicker than ever. The bartender, who had been watching quietly from across the bar, stepped forward, ready to offer assistance. But Monica, still standing tall, shook her head gently. "No need to apologize," she said, her voice steady but now carrying an edge of finality. "It's not the first time someone's tried to ruin my evening." Lisa was about to step in, ready to confront Ethan, but Monica's calm demeanor stopped her. Monica wasn't going to let Ethan get under her skin. She was far too self-assured for that. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. He had expected her to snap. He had expected her to show weakness. Instead, he had made a fool of himself in front of everyone. But he wasn't about to back down. With a quick glance at Monica, he muttered a half-hearted, "Sorry." But it was clear he wasn't sincere. Monica simply nodded, her lips curving into a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's fine," she replied, her words laced with the quiet confidence that had begun to unsettle Ethan. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Monica stood still for a moment, her dress now tainted with the cheap wine that Ethan had spilled. The murmurs around her grew louder, but she refused to let the situation break her composure. She had faced far worse in her life than an arrogant waiter with a vendetta. Still, the sting of the moment lingered, and her fingers clenched for a brief second. She wasn't about to let Ethan or anyone make her feel small. She was Monica Carter, an accomplished woman who had earned her place in every room she stepped into. Her friend Lisa could see the tension rising in the air. She had been watching this whole exchange unfold, her frustration with Ethan growing by the second. "Monica," Lisa whispered urgently, stepping closer to her friend, "this is ridiculous. You've got to do something. This isn't just about him being rude anymore. It's about respect. This is beyond tolerance." Monica gave Lisa a small smile, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm fine," Monica replied calmly, though there was a fire in her eyes. "I'll handle it." Lisa frowned, but Monica's calm confidence made her hesitate. Lisa knew better than to push further. Monica had always been someone who faced adversity head-on. Just as they were talking, Ethan returned to the bar, his gaze still fixed on Monica. He wasn't done. The crowd around them, though quietly observing, didn't dare to speak up, afraid to disrupt the scene. The air was thick with tension. Ethan didn't even try to hide his condescending tone as he addressed the security guard standing nearby. "Hey, George," he called out, his voice loud enough for several guests to hear. "I think she's lost. Maybe she should be escorted out. She doesn't look like she belongs here." The words hit Monica like a slap in the face, but she didn't show it. Instead, her gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the guests, who had been quietly observing the exchange. The entire ballroom fell deathly silent. Every eye was on her. For a moment, there was an eerie stillness, as if the world had paused. Everyone in the room turned their attention to the scene unfolding in front of them. They were witnessing something rare, a display of unapologetic racism, but more importantly, they were seeing how Monica, a woman of grace and dignity, was handling it. Lisa, unable to hold back any longer, spun around to face Ethan. Her voice was sharp, laced with fury. "You're crossing a line, Ethan. What you're doing is disgusting," she snapped, her hands shaking with anger. "You have no right to treat her like this. Do you even understand who she is?" But Monica gently placed her hand on Lisa's arm, signaling for her to stay calm. She wasn't going to let Ethan or anyone else drag her into a confrontation. Lisa stood frozen for a moment. But when she saw the look in Monica's eyes, she took a deep breath, trying to control her temper. Monica was in control, and Lisa knew it. Monica didn't need to shout or escalate the situation. She had a quiet power that demanded respect. Monica turned toward Ethan, her eyes locking with his. The arrogant smirk he had worn earlier was now replaced with uncertainty. He could feel the weight of the growing tension in the room, and for a split second his confidence faltered. Monica's voice broke the silence, calm and unwavering. "And who exactly do you think I am?" The entire room waited for Ethan's response. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The bartender wiped down the counter nervously, and the whispers from the crowd intensified. Ethan, not wanting to seem weak in front of the others, forced a chuckle and shot back, "Certainly not a guest who belongs here." Monica's expression didn't change. She had heard enough. What Ethan didn't realize was that he wasn't just insulting Monica, he was insulting the very principles of respect and decency. And it was in that moment, under the scrutiny of everyone present, that Monica would set the stage for his ultimate humiliation. She stepped closer to him, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her voice was steady but carried an undeniable weight. "You're right, Ethan. I don't belong here because I'm far better than the people who use their positions to belittle others." The room grew even quieter. The shift in Monica's tone was unmistakable. She wasn't just responding to him anymore. She was making a statement that would reverberate through the room for the rest of the evening. The silence was broken by a low murmur from the guests, some nodding in agreement, while others whispered to each other. They had seen the arrogance in Ethan's actions and had now witnessed Monica's poised, dignified response. Ethan, now visibly flustered, opened his mouth to say something, but he didn't know what to say. He had underestimated Monica, and it was now clear that he had no power over her. Monica turned to the security guard who had been standing by looking lost in the confusion. "I'd suggest you do your job and make sure this man doesn't continue to spread his toxic behavior," she said, coolly, her voice unwavering. The security guard nodded, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Ethan's behavior was starting to reflect poorly on the entire event, and the last thing the hotel wanted was to have this escalate further. As the minutes passed, Monica's presence remained unshaken. She had maintained her dignity in the face of blatant disrespect, and in doing so, she had earned something more valuable than any apology: the respect of everyone in the room. The room slowly returned to its previous buzz, but there was a new energy in the air, one of respect for Monica. And Ethan, for the first time, realized that his arrogance had cost him far more than a simple confrontation. The evening had been unfolding with a tense air, but just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any more intense, the door to the ballroom swung open, and in walked Mayor James Carter. The room fell silent immediately. Everyone knew who he was. His presence commanded attention. He was a man of authority, an influential figure in the city. Heads turned, whispers rippling through the crowd as the guests quickly straightened up, adjusting their posture. The mayor was the kind of man who didn't have to announce his arrival. His sheer presence demanded respect. He wore a tailored suit that spoke of sophistication and power, his confident stride drawing the eyes of every guest in the room. As he walked deeper into the ballroom, the guests greeted him warmly, shaking his hand, exchanging pleasantries. It was a scene of respect and admiration, the kind of reception that only the most powerful individuals could garner. But instead of stopping to chat with the influential figures in the room, Mayor Carter headed straight for Monica. At first no one noticed, but as he made his way toward her, the murmurs of curiosity started. Why was he walking directly to her? Monica had been standing with Lisa, still calm after the earlier altercation with Ethan. She didn't expect the mayor to arrive just yet, and certainly not to make a direct line toward her. She looked up and saw him approaching, a warm smile on his face. "There you are, darling," Mayor Carter said, his voice full of affection. He opened his arms wide and pulled Monica into a warm, genuine hug. The shock on Ethan's face was immediate and obvious. His eyes widened in disbelief. He had seen Monica as nothing more than an ordinary guest, someone who didn't belong in such an exclusive environment. But now, standing there in front of everyone, he realized just how wrong he had been. Monica smiled at the mayor's affectionate greeting, not missing a beat. The guests around her whispered, some in awe, others clearly uncomfortable, as the sudden shift in dynamics began to sink in. Ethan stood frozen. His brain couldn't process what had just happened. His gaze flicked from Monica to the mayor and then back to Monica again. The guests, who had been watching in silence, began to piece it all together. Monica wasn't just any guest. She wasn't a worker, an assistant, or someone out of place in this luxurious setting. She was the mayor's wife. Monica pulled away from the hug, smiling softly at her husband as she straightened her dress. She placed a gentle hand on his arm and looked back at the room. There was a certain quiet authority about her now, one that had been unmistakably absent earlier. Ethan's face drained of color. It was like all the blood had rushed out of his head. He was now standing in front of a woman he had humiliated, not knowing she was the very wife of the man he had been trying to impress. His arrogance had just backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Monica glanced at Ethan, who stood rooted to the spot, his mouth hanging open as if searching for an escape from the embarrassing situation. But there was no escape now. The reality of his mistake had hit him hard. His earlier arrogance had led him to this humiliating moment, and there was no turning back. Monica's voice was calm and even, but now there was a cool edge to it. She tilted her head slightly and spoke with a controlled smile. "Is there something you need, Ethan?" Ethan, still in shock, stammered, unable to form a coherent response. His mind raced, but there was no explanation that could undo the damage he had done. He was caught in a trap of his own making. The guests, too, were starting to realize the extent of the situation. They watched as the mayor casually placed an arm around Monica's waist, guiding her to a nearby table. It was clear now. Monica Carter wasn't just any guest. She was the mayor's wife, and she was someone to be respected. Ethan stood at the bar, his face flushed with embarrassment. He tried to compose himself, but it was clear that the damage was done. The proud, self-assured manner in which he had carried himself earlier had evaporated. Now he just seemed small, like a child who had been caught misbehaving. As Monica and Mayor Carter made their way through the room, the guests parted to make way for them, giving the couple the respect they deserved. But Ethan didn't notice any of that. His eyes were fixed on the mayor and his wife, now more flustered than ever, realizing that his earlier behavior would have serious consequences. He could feel the eyes of the other guests on him, and for the first time Ethan understood the meaning of being caught in the wrong. Monica, with grace and poise, didn't let the moment linger. She leaned into her husband as they walked together, and the two shared a brief private exchange that only added to the unspoken power dynamic of the room. And as the whispers started again, this time they were about Ethan's mistake, not Monica's place. The room was still in a state of shock after the mayor's entrance, but as the truth began to sink in, things took a dramatic turn. Ethan, who had been standing frozen, still struggling to come to terms with his blunder, suddenly felt the full weight of the room's gaze upon him. Mayor Carter's expression shifted, his demeanor turning from calm to visibly angered. He took a few steps towards Ethan, the air thick with tension. The guests had fallen silent, the once lively chatter replaced by the anticipation of what was about to unfold. The mayor, a towering figure of authority, looked directly at Ethan, his voice low and controlled, but carrying an unmistakable anger. "Is there a problem here?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. His body froze, and for the first time that evening he felt a deep sense of fear. This wasn't just any guest confronting him. This was the mayor, and the weight of his words was heavy. Ethan tried to gather his thoughts, but the words came out jumbled, his voice strained. "No, sir, I didn't mean—" he stammered, but before he could finish, Lisa, who had been watching everything unfold, couldn't stay silent anymore. "Don't lie, Ethan," Lisa said, stepping forward. "We've all seen how you treat people." She turned to the guests who had gathered around, her voice growing louder, now full of righteous anger. "He's always been rude to people of color. We've seen it before." The guests, who had been silent until now, began to murmur in agreement. A few others nodded, their faces showing that they were no longer willing to remain passive in the face of Ethan's behavior. The tension in the room skyrocketed, and as if on cue, the hotel owner entered, drawn in by the growing noise. The owner had a reputation for running a tight ship and maintaining the highest standards for both guests and staff. It didn't take him long to understand what was happening. Upon hearing the accusations, the owner's face hardened. Without hesitation, he made his way toward Ethan, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "What is going on here?" the hotel owner asked, his tone sharp. Lisa, still visibly upset, didn't hold back. She pointed at Ethan and said, "This man has been disrespectful, not only to Monica, but to countless others. He's been rude and discriminatory for a long time, and it's time someone stopped him." The owner's gaze fell on Ethan, his eyes narrowing as he took in the situation. He could see the truth in the room. Ethan's face, still pale from the shock, was a dead giveaway. He tried to stand taller to salvage his pride, but the truth was already out there. "Ethan, I think you know what this means, don't you?" The hotel owner's voice was calm but carried an air of finality. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but his words faltered. What could he say? How could he justify his actions? The room had already turned against him. He was no longer in control of the situation. "You're fired, Ethan." The owner's words cut through the tension like a knife. "Effective immediately." The guests, though some still shocked, couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The sense of justice, of seeing Ethan's arrogance and racism finally exposed, seemed to settle over the room. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but the words came out as mere whispers, a desperate attempt to undo what had already been done. "Please, wait. Let me explain. I didn't mean it," he tried to say, but it was clear that no one was willing to listen anymore. His words fell on deaf ears. Monica, standing at the back of the room, remained silent, her calm composure in stark contrast to the chaos Ethan had caused. She didn't need to say anything. The truth had been laid bare for everyone to see. Ethan tried to make one last-ditch effort, stepping forward to speak to the mayor, but the mayor didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on Monica, who had been the target of Ethan's disrespect. She had shown strength and dignity, and in doing so, she had exposed Ethan for who he truly was. "I think you've said enough." Mayor Carter's voice was firm, and there was no room for negotiation in his tone. Ethan stood there, frozen in a mixture of humiliation and disbelief. His chest tightened as he realized that no amount of words could fix what had been broken. With a final look at the crowd, Ethan slowly turned and walked toward the door, his head hanging low. The guests stared at him, some with pity, others with disdain. No one moved to stop him. His fate had already been sealed. As the door swung shut behind him, the room fell into a quieter hum, the energy shifting. The tension had lifted, and what remained was a sense of justice having been served. The guests, who had once been unsure of what to say or do, now breathed a sigh of relief. Monica, still standing composed, turned to the mayor with a soft smile. "Thank you for handling that, darling," she said quietly, her voice warm and appreciative. The mayor leaned in, his voice just loud enough for her to hear. "It was my pleasure. He had it coming." As the evening continued, the guests went back to their conversations, their faces now filled with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The party resumed, but the power dynamics had shifted. Ethan had been exposed, and Monica had emerged as the true force to be reckoned with. As the guests continued to murmur among themselves, still processing the shocking events of the evening, a sense of calm slowly began to return to the room. The tension that had once filled the air had dissipated, but there was one final moment left, one final message that needed to be heard. Monica, who had remained composed throughout the entire ordeal, stood at the center of the room, her calm and graceful presence demanding attention. The mayor, standing by her side, watched her with a quiet sense of admiration. Everyone had witnessed the chaos unfold, but now it was Monica's turn to speak. The room fell silent as she took a step forward, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable strength. Respect should not be based on assumptions. Her words cut through the silence, landing with the weight of truth. It wasn't just a statement. It was a lesson, a call to action. She looked at the guests, her eyes filled with a quiet power, and continued. Everyone deserves dignity. No one should be judged by their appearance, their background, or where they come from. The room was still, but now it wasn't just silence. It was the kind of silence that comes before change. The guests, one by one, nodded in agreement, their faces showing a newfound respect for Monica's words. They could see her for what she truly was, a strong, dignified woman who had refused to let anyone take away her self-worth. Ethan, now standing at the back of the room, his face a mixture of humiliation and shame, realized just how badly he had misjudged her. He had thought she was someone to be dismissed, someone who didn't belong. But in reality, she was the one who had shown him what true strength, dignity, and respect looked like. Monica's eyes swept over the guests, her calm gaze locking with theirs. It wasn't just a statement, it was a call to action for everyone present. A call to stand up against racism, to never accept it, and to always fight for justice. As her words settled in the room, the guests began to applaud, their appreciation for her dignity and confidence evident in their applause. The once tense atmosphere had transformed into one of respect and unity. Meanwhile, Ethan stood off to the side, his once confident demeanor shattered. He was no longer the center of attention, but in many ways, that was even worse. He was jobless, and the shame of his actions was now his only companion. Monica and the mayor exchanged a knowing look before they began to leave the room. As they walked towards the exit, Monica held her head high, a symbol of strength and grace. The mayor walked by her side, his hand gently resting on her shoulder, a silent show of support. The guests watched them leave, their eyes following them until they disappeared from sight. But as they did, the message they had left behind lingered in the air. It wasn't just about the events of the night. It was a reminder that we should never judge others based on their appearance, their race, or any other superficial trait. Never judge someone by their appearance. The words seemed to echo in the room, a powerful truth that had been delivered in the most dramatic way. The evening came to a close, but the lesson would stay with everyone who had witnessed it. Before the video ends, the screen fades into black, and a final message appears, encouraging the audience to take action. Racism has no place in our world. Stand up for what's right, speak out against injustice, and never allow anyone to be treated unfairly because of their race or background. A final reminder flashes across the screen. If you believe in equality and justice, join us. Subscribe to our channel and be part of the movement. Let's make the world a better place, one voice at a time.